it's instant millions of people.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Fashion Made. Today I have the absolute pleasure to be sat down with three of the leading minds in fashion, design and technology, namely Anne Slohe, former fashion news director at Elle magazine for 18 years and now tech evangelist within the industry, Craig Crawford, founderpreneur of Crawford IT, as well as the former VP of IT strategy over at Burberry, and Harry Allen of Harry Allen Design, and the creative director of the New York Design Pavilion, which is why we're all here today. Harry, I walked through the Design Pavilion in Times Square yesterday. It's an incredible experience. Just want you to tell me a little bit more about it, please.
One of the things about experience is that you need to be giving the public something fun to do or engaging to do, and the hard sell is not very well received. It needs to be a generous offering. You need to give someone just this great experience that then they'll talk about and want to share and everything. And then therein lies the magic. You get the share, but you don't get it if you're giving them the hard sell. You don't, and corporations in general want to shoot themselves in the foot. They want to hard sell it. And so we're sort of there to help them craft that messaging and make sure they're doing something generous that people will want to share.
Can I just add to that? Because Harry, seeing it in Times Square, and I don't want to say competing with all of the digital billboards and everything, but I found that people found exploration throughout the thing very natural, and people just coming through Times Square are enjoying it, and they might not necessarily know that it's all connected, but every installation where people could interact, they were, and they are.
All we have to do is put it up, and people fill it. So that we have no problem with that. I mean, the messaging is interesting. Like we want people to know it's there, and that's a little bit hard because people don't come. I mean, there are many people now. We have a lot of advertising and a lot of media partners this year. So there are people who are coming just for the Design Pavilion, to see the Design Pavilion. But I'll be honest, most of the people in Times Square, they're there to experience Times Square and all of its madness and the screens and all of that. So, and for those people, then how do you let them know what's going on? But honestly, if you get someone to sit in a great chair or to interact with an installation that something, and they're just doing it very naturally, then I feel like we sort of have accomplished our mission also. Like they've come in contact with some great aspect of design that they'll take away. They'll remember that chair. They might buy that chair. They might say to someone else like, oh, hey, yeah, I saw that in Times Square. So just getting people exposed to it I think is important also. And then we're working on the messaging, like how do you gracefully integrate it so people know where they are and know why they're there and know why they're doing what they're doing. But I think getting the people into it and interacting is really the first step to that. So.
Yeah, I guess being in Times Square helps.
Yeah, I mean, it's instant millions of people. So when it comes to retail, like that's where we're going with this conversation. I always say, the pop-up as one imagines it is on some side street in Soho, and like maybe you can drag a few people down to come while you're there for a month. I mean, I've done pop-ups with, I do a line of products for a company called AreaWear, and we had a pop-up one year in Port Authority, and everyone was like, oh, this is going to be genius. All these people come through Port Authority, and it was so hard to get people out of their path and into that, whereas in Times Square, like we literally put it up in the walkways. Like if you have an open end on it, people will just walk into it. I mean,
they're open for experience. They're coming to Times Square.
Yeah, and they're
an experience
little
destination.
It's like you get to Times Square, okay, and you go like, oh, okay, I took my selfie with the screens, and what's next? So there really is this opportunity. You have a population that's looking to be entertained, and so we're serving that purpose.
And I started talking to Harry, or rather, he reached out to me to bring in some fashion sponsors, and we were speaking to Mayor Mecco about retrofitting a Airstream camper, and working with AR and entertainment companies to help tell their story. So we'd actually embed films and stop motion animation about the history of Marimekko and the museum and the house in the forest. And you could embed that into the fabric, some of their iconic prints, and then have those prints, as awning shades and, astroturf, and have a big cookout for people to just come through and have, a hot dog and some root beer. But then they could train their phone on the print and have the AR experience.
It's not hard to get people to engage. It's a pretty simple story, but I have to say Times Square Alliance is so open to ideas. So they're willing to try it out. We've done some really crazy stuff on the plazas that, like, for instance, this year, this group of young designers, I keep saying that, they're like 3 years younger than I am, but I've just known them since they were, kids.
Yeah.
But they're from Philadelphia, and they're doing this whole idea of office play or adult play, and so they've developed these seesaws that both go up and down and around.
Yes,
and they're amazing, right?
They are amazing.
But they're also like a little bit dangerous, like people who don't know what they're doing, and actually kids get on it and fly off, which I think is so funny, because if you're an adult, you're really cautious, so you sort of get in the rhythm and you have this beautiful experience. If you're a kid, you get on, you rattle around on it, and then all of a sudden you pop off over to the side. So it's like, but we have a rubber flooring down, and like they're willing to have this in Times Square, like they're willing to allow that to exist, which I think is so great,
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing to have such good, strong partnership, especially with someone like Times Square, and there's so much retail, technology, fashion, brands. Times Square, especially as a foreigner, is basically the kind of archetypal representation of all of that. And retail's obviously having a really hard time at the moment. My question to you, and Anne, maybe you can answer this first, is how can technology save retail?
Well, I think there's so many facets and ways in which it will save retail. And I think we're just seeing that. You're seeing a lot of the real estate developers talk about how they're going to reinvent the mall and make it, the center for the community by bringing in food and entertainment and retail. And I think Craig can speak to, how the actual fashion, the technology for fashion will facilitate the consumer experience and make it more fun. From my point of view, I'm excited about the entertainment aspect of it, and engaging people. Whether you find yourself someday in a version of a mall that's one part Gattaca, one part Minority Report, and while you're waiting in line to get into your restaurant, you're actually on the 50-yard line of the Super Bowl. You're in it and it's around you. I mean, I do think that is the future retail experience, and I do think developers are looking to create that. Obviously, from a biometric standpoint and from a waste and circular standpoint, I think there's, from sustainability point of view, I think that's very hopeful about reducing waste and making people feel better about consuming as they become more educated, which I think they will, and more conscious, which I think they are. I think, certainly maybe not millennials. I don't think they're buying sustainability as much as we would have hoped, but I do think the next generation will. So I think that'll come into play. And I think that you had a very interesting point about how when you were at Burberry and you had to build the store of tomorrow, essentially, you had to think about all the changes that were coming to make sure that you were able to adapt in your infrastructure. And I think that's something that retailers are grappling with.
Yeah,
now.
I mean, it's heavy lifting, and the investment is substantial. And at Burberry, we knew we were going to be broadcasting, so we put a satellite dish on top of Regent Street, right? We behaved like a media brand, and we looked at digital asset management. How do we change the channel on the screens, right? The screen that's in children's wear today may be women's wear tomorrow. Store interiors move around, and you just can't take technology and take it off the wall and move it around. So the infrastructure on how we organize that and being able to reuse content, super important. And I think for this particular installation in Times Square, we looked at a lot of different technology options, and I think some of them we shelved to look at next year. Things like wayfinding or experiences that are unlocked with your phone, but also tracking the movement of the crowd. I mean, because like your reference to Port Authority, those are commuters on their way somewhere and trying to get them to stop when they're already probably running late or
Yeah, exactly.
whereas in Times Square, they're there for some sort of experience they don't even know. So
People just come hang anyway.
Yeah,
They're sitting around anyway. So we can have them sit in our chairs or hang out in our spaces and shop in our stores rather than the stores that are already there. So.
That's right. So we did little bits this time, didn't we? I mean, we had the T-shirt designs that were all blippable, and so hold the blipper app to that and get different designs and animations. And then there were other sponsor examples of really interesting tech and things. Avery Dennison had some interesting stuff in the pavilion as well. Mm-hmm. But
well, touched on retail a little bit this year between Dougal and Avery Dennison, and then we had you were a speaker at the design talk, so we touched on it a little bit. But these things it takes years to build these things up, and I've seen this over the time. Like you just get on a hot idea like the month before the design pavilion, and it's just not possible to make it happen.
Well, that's why we're looking to 2019. Some of the people that I'm speaking to, Adidas and Mary Mecco, as I said, I would love to have an activation with them, whether it has to do with just highlighting a shoe and using AR to create some sort of experience for a customer. I'd also love to speak to them about participating in the idea of a virtual store where a customer comes through and they, experience the shoe in situ with some technological application layered on top of it. But then there's also the opportunity to customize and purchase. We've been talking about the idea of developing a virtual store. We'd love to get the New York Magazine and the Strategist involved in something like that. That would be really exciting, I think, for consumers. Harry they host a dance party, which is a lot of fun. And one of the ideas that he had that he's kind of interested in terms of data, is this idea of, getting an artist to partner with a data collecting company and turn those numbers into, well, you should speak about it because it was your idea, but I love the idea of the flash mob of like getting large numbers of people into Times Square.
Well, that's like if you got everyone that passed through the design pavilion to do one small thing that all added up to something larger, you could build mountains, so I sort of I keep thinking I think across many spectrum, and we're sort of focusing on fashion today and the tech space around fashion, which I think is really interesting. I'm constantly trying to ideate around how to triangulate between sponsors, someone who's going to pay for it, creative talent, and our needs to entertain or to provide shelter, or is it a lounge, is it a food experience, is it I'm constantly trying to figure out what we need there in order for people to come and enjoy it. So and that triangulation between all those entities, in the middle there's this sweet spot. So I'm constantly, when I'm confronted with a new sponsor opportunity, having to ideate around it. So it's fun for me too. It's like a totally different head. I'm normally in my studio drawing things that will then get made by industry, which is a very long process. I was going to say actually, to continue this train of thought about, because I just got off onto a whole tangent. That's cool. But about tech and how it's gonna save retail, right? I think tech can be hugely entertaining. It serves a lot of my needs at the Design Pavilion. But what I really think that's interesting is that the temporary nature of Design Pavilion in relationship to retail, and that in this space, we can do anything. We're not tied to any brick and mortar. We're not tied. You can even get out of your brand space if you want to. It can really be anything. And that's, to me, is so much fun. We have these 9 days. It's go for it, blow people's minds. And it's You can commit to it as much as you want, and it can be an experiment. We can see if we try this out, will people engage?
Yes.
If we try out Blipper, and one of the things I learned this time is we really should have had a pad there that was all loaded with Blipper, because getting people to download is an issue.
Yeah.
So every time you try something new, and so that applies to retail, and people already have figured that out. I'm new to the rodeo.
But not everyone's figured it out. And I was going to say what you've just said, and that is, it's a place to invent and a place to play. Mm-hmm. And technology has empowered a lot of that, but most of it's transparent, as it should be, because people don't want to really be looking at screens or fiddling around with Wi-Fi or whatever. So, every mobile POS system that you have there has infrastructure behind it. There's Wi-Fi for that space, all of that stuff. And then what you've been able to do is just reinvent retail by playing. Mm-hmm. And then seeing what works. And I think the big unlock for us is going to be looking at what all the data says. And that's the thing that then we turn into more industrial type activity, where we say, okay, well, we found this works out really well, so why wouldn't we look at doing that in a store that maybe isn't a pop-up, but is...
And actually, maybe some of what you learn is that people are really responsive to low-tech things also.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
We have this young designer from he works in the Netherlands. He designed this. It's furniture that you neither sit on or lie on or stand on. It's actually everything leans backwards, and so they're these leaning, almost like leaning beds,
like fainting couches.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Fainting couches from the antebellum day.
And he has them there. He calls them anti-gravity. So it's about sort of relieving stress, and actually apparently your heart rate lowers at that. You're leaning back at an angle, and they're filled from...
People loved it. People are loving that.
And it's so weird because it's this meditative thing in the middle of Times Square, and then you're sort of lying back on it. What you're looking at is all the advertisement, but actually that's sort of interesting, right? If you're going to feed someone information, maybe you need to give them... Design can give them the posture or the... How does it get delivered?
That's, so that they're receptive.
Yes. Or
yes.
That sounds.
Well, that's the magic mix. I think everybody's realizing that the future of retail needs to embrace, which is the high with the low, the actual physical sensory experience, and then the technology comes in and makes the shopping part of it easy and seamless and customized.
Yeah, eventually maybe it will all just become embedded in some way, it doesn't...
Like a chip in our brain?
Yeah, that's what you want.
No, I think it's coming. Even if you look at but they're talking about how do you revive retail on Bleecker Street, which we all know has been, decimated by high rents. And I know that the Brookfield people, their temporary fix for it is to think about taking over the entire street and bringing in, not just pop-ups, but maybe we can do a week-long, flower activation, or, just to create customer experiences that are, temporary and become rarefied because of their temporaryness.
Right. And therefore a draw for people to come in and be part of. And
it's the magic of theater, right?
Well,
why is theater so special? It's because it happens.
And it's ephemeral.
Yeah, it's ephemeral. Mm-hmm. And so, I think we have to look to all of these things. I feel a little bit the whole Times Square thing is I feel like Barnum, we're putting on a show. I want it to be really high design, but I also want people to be able to engage with it. So you're sort of stretched, but actually that's an interesting place to be in, right? And actually things like the Zoo Studio piece, it actually does it, right? It's a great piece of design that everyone can engage with, and then I've done my job. And it's also sort of fun because all day long people are getting on and off of it. It has that temporal quality. So I think there are ways for all of this to merge for the time being until the dust settles. I think this is a really interesting forum to play around. So,
and I don't know that the dust is going to settle. I think part of retail's problem is the dust did settle and it became routine, and and boring.
Formulaic.
Yeah, and formulaic, and nobody wants that. And so I think what's happened with the Design Pavilion is really a model for what retailers can look at and take from and play. And that, visual merchandising is an important part of retail. And
It's the magic of the narrative.
and it's been in so many stores, it's just become static and boring, or doesn't even really exist, or it's not curated.
Well, I
it's
think
more.
Harry said it. It's become the hard sell, and
Yeah,
people will
yeah.
disengage the minute they're being.
Yeah, I mean, I think the hard sell was like it's been okay for a while. Like it's been okay for a while. Like the whole monogramming and all that stuff, or that the whole luxury. Like I have this bag.
The status years,
the status,
which
and like
predicated, I suppose, its
It's
success
like-
on people's insecurity, striving psychology, which
Hey, listen, it
that's
worked.
not. Yeah, it
It
worked.
worked.
It worked.
Yeah,
well,
so
it worked. It worked,
it
and now we're
worked,
entering a
but-
new era where the upcoming generations, they don't want to be a part of that sort of kind of greediness, and they actually.
it's
are a little
about
bit
generosity.
more. It is about generosity, and they want to be more altruistic, but they also want to have fun, and then, they want to have a sense of humor again. I think the problem with retail and fashion is that it just became so humorless.
The one other thing that I'm interested in terms of retail, though, is actually the hands-on, the making of, the measuring of, and all of that stuff. Like the reason that you go to a store, like a high-end store, is for the experience in a way. Like it feels really good to have a suit measured, and that's sort of the antithesis of what we've been talking about. Not necessarily, but it's an experience too that I keep thinking that maybe we ought to explore a little bit at Design Pavilion. Whether maybe it's digital, are we biometrically scanning people or whatever, is that going to be interesting? But also the making of, like I could see, like I want to make stuff in Times Square. I want 12 sewing machines there with people making it, or
get Eileen
weaving.
Fisher to get her felting machine in there to felt up
Yeah.
upcycled clothing. And
We were talking earlier to the Brooklyn Fashion Design Accelerator, which is a really very, very interesting organization run
Yes,
by a friend
yes,
of
it
mine
is.
from Pratt, Deborah Johnson, and it's like they make things there, and they're doing all sorts of. They're working at the intersection of tech and making.
Deborah's a big PI supporter. She's come and spoken at the conferences.
Oh, great! Yeah, I really.
So we love the work that.
Yeah, and I would
They're
love to
doing.
get them there. And we had a last ditch effort between them and Eileen Fisher that like really felt like maybe we can get it together for next year, because they both sort of support each other in a way. Like it's the same story, and we could actually get the BFDA there, like maybe weaving, recycled textile into new things, or could they be felting, or could they, like that, the making thing I think is very interesting. The hands-on part of it is very interesting, and it's experience. And of course, so I think it, like I love that juxtaposition of like, oh, we actually have this year, we have an artist creating a cover for New York Magazine in situ, in the space, in the Design Pavilion, and they just finished it. They're going to photograph it tomorrow, this woman, Joanna Alvarez. But the idea that we have a little art residency in Times Square, I think, is really fun, or craft residency, or whatever it is. It's, again, experience.
Yeah.
So, like, and then that against tech, like,
You
is
can
there
layer
some way
text on top
to
of that.
merge that together? It's like, it becomes really interesting.
I think you should do a screen takeover, all of Times Square.
Yeah. If someone's already there and they're already going to buy the media, I say do something in Times Square that, like, if you're weaving in Times Square, does that process then go up on the screens?
Yes,
big
exactly.
like that? All of a sudden, those screens get a lot more interesting to me.
Yes.
If you're connecting on the ground somehow, something that goes on in the screen.
Well, that's right, and
it's very possible.
And we talked about this. We did this with Nova, division of DreamWorks at Burberry. We did that in Piccadilly Circus, where people could interact with the screen and personalize product and shake and toss it up on the screen. So, yeah, that is completely doable. It's super fun.
Well, we reached out to Instagram because one of the artists that Harry knows has this selfie head, which is a foam head upon which you can project your own image. It's quite large.
It's quite large, and actually, we talked about it many different ways. We were not able to get it funded this year, but I would bring that to Times Square next year. It won't be like fresh and new, but it still will be fresh and new to most people. And it's just this gigantic head. It's like the Walt Disney World Hall of Presidents, where it's a generic head, but then. And it's not projection, it happens with LEDs, but people go in and they have a selfie taken and then it's projected up on this giant head. I mean, what better thing to have in Times Square? We had a little bit of pushback, but it's like that's exactly what people are doing there, is like saying, I'm here, and then all of a sudden you can do it in this giant scale. Like that to me would be really great. We're going to keep
And that's
trying on
entertainment. And that's what retail needs.
Absolutely. You need this convergence of it's called phygital, isn't it? Digital and physical experiences. And I think that's what you're talking about here, is having something that you do on the ground that you're actually interacting with in a physical way, but then you can see some huge scale digital manifestation of what you've just done as well. And I think if people can create those kind of experiences instead of just walking into a store and that mannequin's got that jacket on and those shoes, and that's kind of what people want, these days.
Well, and to take that experience away in both physical and digital format, right? If you buy something, you're taking the clothing or the product away, whether they're plates or.
But first, they want to be delighted.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
and if you can save that in some digital format, like an experience in Times Square that you can then send off and share to friends and family or whatever, then that ties it all back into the basic stuff that we all want, which is what we talked about the other day.
Yeah, we were up at Resonance and we were talking about what we could bring to the design pavilion, because, how could we engage the public? And I don't even know if I mentioned this to you, but maybe I mentioned it earlier, but the idea of, taking plaid, so they make plaid, turning it into a large-scale human tic-tac-toe experience. But at the same time, they're being measured and they can place an order for, a shirt.
The plaid experience, I think, is, I mean, you can basically take anything and plug it into the formula. Design is a great partner. Design in its big, it's a great experiential partner. It's a great, I always say we have great real estate and we have great context. Design being the context, we can plug almost anything into that. But,
and you've got an audience.
Yeah.
So from a customer acquisition perspective, they're there already. And that's one of the things retail struggles with, getting people in the store.
Yeah, I loved the idea. You had, at one point via Blipper, you had spoken about creating a space, just a blank space, in which you could have a dance perform. I'm dying to get a dance involved with the Design Pavilion, as if there aren't enough moving parts already. I think dance is a really great complement to everything that we're doing. We're doing a lot of abstract form, in general, with design, industrial design, architecture. So this idea that you bring in dance, it's another abstract art form. I think it could operate in amongst what we're doing very well. So I'm interested in dance, but this idea that you could create a dance in one of those spaces that would always live in that space virtually, so anyone could come in with their phone and watch this dance performance, and
be uploaded into it themselves. Yeah.
Like this thing can live virtually, this virtual memento of something that's been done. Like, even if you just had someone come in, you had people come in and they're just like graffitiing the walls in this space, and you record it all, and then people can go back into it and watch it become graffitied, or like, how does it live? I don't know. Like, or you can. But I thought it was really interesting. Like, I thought it was an experience, but it's also this like virtual documentation that can live somewhere that people can always go back and visit. That I thought was a really cool idea.
For me, when I went into the space for the first time, it was a bit daunting because there's so much chaos in digital signage around Times Square, right? I mean, one of my favorite things to do when I'm in New York in the summertime is to drive through Times Square with the top down and the convertible, because it's like, oh my God, it's completely overwhelming and it's an amazing space, but you're driving through sort of this Blade Runner experience and then you're leaving it, and there's nothing like it anywhere else in the world. So then to put something on the ground where people are interacting and still that chaos is overhead, and they're still delighted, and they're touching things physically. And I mean, I love the whole thing about kids falling off, and I mean,
It's oddly calm when you're there.
Yes,
It's
it
like the
is.
eye of the storm.
It
You've
is.
got all this chaos whirling around you, but because you're engaged in a, physically
on the ground, like your
sensate experience.
relationship is just right across from you.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I really want to do, and this was the first year we were able to build a pavilion. I had Inflate come in. I designed the pavilion. I'm of course the easiest designer to partner with because I know, I happen to know a lot about what I'm doing up there. So I was able to, and I got my friend Nick, who owns Inflate, to build an inflatable of my design, bring it in. It was a great experience for him. It was perfect for us. But what it ends up being is this example of what other people can do in that space. If you build a space in Times Square and get people in, it's actually a very different, calm experience. And we want to do more of that. We want more pavilions, more enclosed space. It doesn't all have to be outside. Like I even envision that this store, this pop-up, it will be covered. It will be rooms. It will be divided up in some way so that people navigate through it. So we need to, that's part of the challenge in Times Square is building these structures or isolating space. I mean, it's also really great to have things right outside where you're interacting with the screens, but there's also this ability to build these structures. And the pavilion that we did this year is the first example of it. So for me, it's really like taken us to the next level.
It's super cool. I really enjoyed walking through there. I think, Anne, you made a really good point. It is like being in the eye of the storm. There's so much craziness around you. And then you just sort of get zoned in to all of these unique new projects. And I know you had a load of people come out from UK with Avery Dennison and loads of cool stuff. So it was a really great experience for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So well done to you. And I'd just like to thank all of you for coming and speaking to us today. It was a really great chat, and I think we can probably end on the fact that it's the human experiences that are going to be the ones that save the retail industry, and if you can combine that with technology, then all the better. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody get up.